What a day in Happy Valley. It was almost a pretty unhappy day for the Ohio State Buckeyes, but after an explosive fourth quarter, both frankly on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, Ohio State pulled out a 44-31 win, and their national championship and Big Ten championship hopes are very much still alive. We've got our instant analysis show on Buckeye Breakdown coming up.
We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All-Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.
Well, hey, everybody, and welcome back to Beaver Stadium. We just wrapped up with Ryan Day and his press conference after Ohio State pulled off a 44-31 win over the Penn State Nittany Lions. I'm Brendan Gulick along with Andrew Lind. Appreciate your joining us here on part of our coverage, Buckeye Breakdown podcast. We are part of Buckeyes now on Fan Nation in the Sports Illustrated Media Group. You can join us and help us support this show by subscribing to our YouTube channel, or if you like to listen after the fact, we post the audio in most places you like to find your favorite podcasts. Wow. Andrew, there's a lot of places we can start this. Obviously, there were some pretty uncomfortable moments here today. I would hope that Ohio State learns from those. It's always easier to learn from bad moments when you win a game, but I don't think we can start this pod anywhere other than JT Tuimoloau, who had the absolute game of his life.
I was even asking people after the game, if this was maybe the most dominant performance that they had seen from an Ohio State defensive lineman, maybe only rivaled by Chase Young against Wisconsin in 2019 when he had 4 sacks against, what was maybe the best rushing offense in the country at the time. And, yeah, without his performance today, they don't walk out of there with a win. And, just for him to kind of, people have kind of been asking or wanting to see more out of him the first couple weeks of the season. And then he's really come on strong in the last 2 weeks, and then has today's game. And, it just kind of speaks to the type of player that he is, that he was able to, maybe impact the game in other ways before this, and then finally have his breakout game today.
Hey, both of you guys, just real quick, the behind-the-scenes help here. Both of you guys check your mics and see, because I'm hearing some feedback. Sounds like there's some things that are sliding around, so hopefully we can kind of mute that in the background. No, it was pretty amazing. Look, it was everything you could have hoped for and more out of a guy that was as highly recruited as Tuimoloau was. He was the prized recruit that Ohio State had to wait forever to finally land, and frankly probably exuded more patience than they cared to. But it worked out okay, and then to see him literally take over a game like this was just absolutely unbelievable. And he did it on a day where the offense was sputtering at points. Largely, they were okay if you look at the final numbers, but there were some problems today, and I am officially a little bit concerned about Ohio State's run game, and I don't know exactly what the problem is. I kind of started to think it's a Matthew Jones issue at right guard. I was watching DeJuan Jones a lot, and I don't feel like it's a right tackle problem. I'll go back and watch the game again, but my initial thought is that the Buckeyes are having some trouble at that spot with consistency. Matthew Jones had some good plays today. In fact, I thought he made a great block on TreVeyon Henderson's 41-yard touchdown run that helped kind of seal the game. But too often, that's been a problem spot on the line, and if Ohio State can't run the ball, it's going to be really, really tough for them to win the whole thing this year.
Back to what you were mentioning about JT's, prolonged recruitment as well. And, I think Ryan Day earlier this week, he mentioned about how they had gotten fined for going out and, seeing CJ and recruiting him when he was supposed to be at an award show. And that kind of brought the same kind of thought to my mind as well about, it's one of those things that it's worth it in the end, that all the stuff that they went through, having to go those extra 5 months, in terms of recruiting him and showing up at the airport in Hawaiian outfits and, those kind of things, just taking that extra step to get this caliber of player. And then, obviously that turning out well for them. And then just with the running game, I would agree with what you said. I do think that, there are some maybe personnel issues in that line that, are they're just not maybe getting the kind of, push that they should be or the consistency that they should be. And therefore, that's caused those issues.
I feel like we should talk about C.J. Stroud, who had a really solid day. I don't know that he had an electrifying day, but his numbers were pretty good. He made good decisions with the ball. And I think every time the team decided, hey, we're going to throw the ball, his first thought was, okay, where's 18? Because that guy is unbelievable. I wonder what it was like for fans at home to sit there and say, hey, just get the ball to Marvin, because in the stadium, there were 100,000 people here that knew every time Marvin lined up in one-on-one, there was a good chance he was getting the ball.
The fourth down conversion in particular, I'm sitting here at home watching it, and I looked at the people that were sitting around me, and I was like, they're going to throw it to Marvin up here at the top, running a slant, because it was very obvious what was going to happen and, how they needed that yardage. But yeah, I think with CJ, I'm continuously impressed with just his throwing ability. And there was that long pass to Emeka that was, that was an NFL throw, and that's why he's going to be a top NFL draft pick in April. But then there's those moments that I'm like, well, I'm not sure exactly why this is happening. There was the fumble at the end of the first half that I think he should have had better situational awareness about. There was a couple delay of games that, if he's paying attention more to the clock. And it's just kind of one of those things that maybe I don't feel like he was as sharp mentally today as he normally is. But obviously all of the physical attributes are still there.
I totally agree. There were some moments that were frustrating there. Ryan Day actually took the blame in the post-game press conference for what happened at the end of the first half. He said basically he sort of thought CJ would just throw a fade with a few seconds left, and if it worked, it worked. If it didn't, it didn't. He kicked a field goal. And he said, I just didn't communicate it with him. It was, totally my fault. But yeah, the play clock thing was a little frustrating. I don't remember what the final number was, but there were at least 3 delay of game penalties and several others that were really close. Maybe it's because they were playing a true road game and there were 100,000 people here that didn't like Ohio State. I'm sure that was part of it. I also hope that the Buckeyes can use this as some fuel going forward, because the reality is they're probably not going to get a crowd like this the rest of the year for, the regular season. You've got Michigan at home. You're not going to see a crowd like this at Northwestern or Maryland. You've got Indiana at home. And the Big Ten championship games at a neutral site where, if Ohio State gets there, you know how well Buckeye Nation travels. So, look, good that they handled it. And I was impressed with the fact that when things got really tough, this team figured out a way to win. They scored 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. But I could see where maybe there were some problems manifesting themselves today in a communication perspective that, frankly, they need to get addressed, because if you want to win a national championship, you can't have little breakdowns like that.
The communication issue, especially at the end of the first half, on the TV it said that they still had 1 timeout. Then they're being told that they don't have any timeouts. It doesn't show that in the stadium. So there's, obviously the confusion there. I know a lot of fans were confused by why they didn't just call a timeout and then decide, kind of reinforce that, hey, we need to get this out really quickly, and if not, then we need to kick a field goal right now, and those kind of things. And they're lucky that it didn't come back to bite them. But kind of to reinforce my point about TJ, everybody in the stadium and everybody at home knew where that rush was coming from, except for him in that situation, and that kind of surprised me. So maybe that's why I said that maybe it just was one of those off days for him mentally there. But then, I think that being in these situations, obviously it's going to be helpful moving forward, because this was really the first bit of adversity that they had faced this season. But at the same time, in the fourth quarter, I'm thinking to myself, what are potential tiebreakers for the Big Ten championship if they lose this? And then all of a sudden, you look away and you look back and they're up 3 scores. And it's kind of one of those things you feel better after the fact, but when you're right in the middle of it, maybe not so much.
It's hilarious. I was sitting next to one of our colleagues on the beat in the press box, and I turned and looked at him and I said, hey, Penn State beats Ohio State. Ohio State beats Michigan, and Michigan beat Penn State. and everybody wins every other game, who goes to the Big Ten title game? And
Ohio State, because
the answer,
it has to do with the Big Ten West, and Ohio State doesn't play anybody on the Big Ten West that gives them that, would give them that tiebreaker. So it would be Michigan.
I was going to say, I would think, because especially if Illinois goes and does what they're supposed to do, doesn't Michigan play Illinois?
Yeah.
So if they would win in that scenario, then yeah, Michigan would have gotten it. And literally that is the last, as I understand it, the last tiebreaker before a coin flip. So yeah, it's, thankfully we don't have to consider that at the moment. But look, the final score was a little uncomfortable for me because, I mean, look, you are what your record says you are. You scored as many points as you scored. It's a 60-minute game. You just do what you got to do. It just didn't feel like the kind of game that Ohio State scored 44 points. When you think about that kind of a point total, it just walks you down a path of, oh, well, they must have moved the ball really well and scored a bunch of touchdowns. They didn't really. In fact, Penn State outgained Ohio State. I would love to know, and maybe it's not all that far back. I bet you it hasn't happened in a little while that Ohio State won a game in which their opponent outgained them. It certainly hasn't happened this year. I don't know. It was just a weird feeling game. Penn State played really well, far better than I thought they were going to play. I said all week I knew they were capable of winning this game, but I just didn't see it happening. I thought Ohio State would cover. I didn't think it was going to be that big of a problem. And Penn State gave Ohio State all it could handle for a good 45 minutes until the Buckeyes kind of poured it on there in the fourth quarter.
In reality, the game to me feels more like a 35-24 kind of game, just kind of aided by some big plays here and there. You take JT's, interception return for a touchdown off the board, and you take off, what should have been a tackle that by two players that ended up being a long touchdown for Penn State. It's those kind of things that add up really quickly to then getting that final score. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely think the word that you use, uncomfortable, is probably the best way to describe it because, like I said, for 3.5 quarters, I was literally thinking, you know what, they may very well lose this game. Like if they just aren't able to respond the right way and, kind of be that thing that separates you from being a national championship kind of team versus just being a Rose Bowl team or something like that. If they weren't able to respond in that way, they were going to lose this game. And then, all of a sudden, like I said, in the blink of an eye, it's a 3-score game, and you're like, okay, well, now it's a runaway train to Michigan, and we'll see what happens then.
It's just such a weird feeling to think that, there was a legitimate fear in the fourth quarter. I think I even put something on Twitter to this, to this point of like, hey, it's time to acknowledge this is not feeling great. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to go Penn State's way, but there were some legitimate moments of like, I don't know. I wasn't that worried at halftime. There was so much time, but I just, end of the third quarter, I didn't feel great about it. And admittedly, I think Ohio State better address the run game big time these next 3 weeks, or they could struggle November 26th. You've got to be able to run the ball between the tackles consistently. They ran for less than 100 yards today, and they still won, and they should still get credit for that. But it's going to be really hard to win a national title and to beat Michigan, win a Big Ten championship if you can't run the ball when you need to run it.
Historically, in the Michigan game, it's the team that runs the ball better and has more rushing yards that wins that game. So, if they want to win, then they need to focus these next 3-4 weeks on fixing those issues. And it obviously doesn't help not knowing what's going on with Miyan. And it looked like it was his knee at one point. It looked like it was his wrist. It looked like it was his finger. So I don't think that anybody really knows what's going on at this point. But you're going to need him in that game and that toughness and physicality that he brings. And if you don't have that, well then TreVeyon needs to continue to build upon his fourth quarter. Maybe you'll get Dallin or Chip involved in those kind of things because you're going to need more than just TreVeyon to do that. And yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, I think we kind of have gotten used to Ohio State just blowing people out to where you're like, okay, every single game should be that way. And really, not many teams can go on the road at the number 13 team in the country, play in front of 110,000 and still win a game by 13 points.
Yeah, and do it by scoring 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter when this crowd was as loud as they were and believed, and frankly, Penn State as a team believed as much as they did. Because it's one thing if a team gets off to a hot start and they're trying to upset somebody and, you ride the wave for a few minutes. Like Penn State felt like, hey, we are right there. And they played well enough largely to get the job done, at least through the first 45 minutes. A defensive score saved the day for Ohio State. I thought the 3-play drive when they were quick passes to Marvin and then Emeka and then obviously the 41-yard touchdown run from Henderson, that was huge. But, Cade Stover, after having a tough moment or two in the first half, I thought Cade Stover came up big late in the game. Again, I give Ohio State some credit for grinding out a game that, frankly, I didn't expect to be quite this close. But Vegas did, and a lot of other people did. And historically, you would think that these two teams would play close games. So what do I know? I don't know. I was glad to see the Buckeyes respond with some adversity. I would say that they definitely faced a little bit of adversity week one. The offense didn't look very good in the first half against Notre Dame, but in the second half, when they had to run it, they did. And they absolutely wore down Notre Dame in that fourth quarter, grinding out tough yards, especially on that 90-some-yard scoring drive they had at the end of the game. Today, it was, okay, we can't run the ball, that's fine. The bubble screens drove me nuts in the first half, and I think a lot of people felt the same way. Ryan Day said post-game, well, hey, look, that's an extension of the run game. We're just trying to get people running.
And that because you get a guy out on the outside one-on-one, try to get 3 or 4 yards. It's effectively the same thing as a 3 to 4 yard run, just less bodies in the middle at that point. But yeah, I think that really just when it comes to that adversity that they faced today, I think it was a little bit different than the Notre Dame game, because the Notre Dame game, they lost Jackson right in the first quarter, and the game plan had to kind of change. Today, they were still doing what they intended to do for 3.5 quarters. It just wasn't going the way that they wanted it to. And they weren't able to get a push in the run game or those kind of things. And you had to battle through something that wasn't just the result of something bigger. Like this was a adversity brought on by Penn State's defense, not and a thing that was on your offense that just happened to be missing, if that makes sense.
Well, Ohio State got a good little scare for a little while. But by the end of the game, especially with the way the Buckeyes played in the fourth quarter, the total outcome was not necessarily in jeopardy. And Ohio State did win the game by 2 touchdowns. And their dreams and hopes are still alive as they work toward winning a conference championship. No disrespect to the opponents they're going to play the next 3 weeks. They're not going to give Ohio State the kind of test that Penn State did. And I hope Ohio State can stay healthy and stay focused these next few weeks. Because they've got a really big test coming on November 26th. And I don't think Ohio State forgot about what happened last year. So this was a good win. It was good to see how the Buckeyes responded to some adversity. And I was impressed by Ohio State's leadership in some critical moments down the stretch of that game. 44-31 the final score from Beaver Stadium in Pennsylvania. The Buckeyes hang on, and they beat Penn State. For Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks for subscribing to the show and supporting our coverage on Buckeyes Now. Follow us on Buckeyes Now _FN if you're interested on our social media channels. FN, of course, for Fan Nation. We're part of the Sports Illustrated Media Group. And you can find this podcast wherever you like to find your favorite podcasts if you want the audio-only version. We'll see you again real soon. BuckeyesNow.com for all the latest. Plenty more to come here from Penn State.